home of the fairies. In the days of King Injo, 1623 to 1649, there was a student of Confucius living in Kapyong, a young man who was unmarried and had received only a modest education in history and literature. For some reason, he left his home and traveled into Kangwon province with a servant, journeying on horseback until they encountered a mountain where they were caught in a heavy rain. Mysteriously, his servant suddenly passed away, leaving the young man alone and distraught. He moved the servant's body to the hillside and continued on his way, overcome with sorrow. Shortly after, his horse collapsed under him and died as well. Now alone, soaked by the rain on an unfamiliar road, he broke down in tears. At that moment, an old man with striking eyes and hair as white as snow approached him. He asked why the young man was crying, and in response to his tale of woe, the death of his servant and horse, the rain, and his lost way, the elder took pity. Raising his staff, he pointed towards a house beyond the pine trees, instructing him to follow the stream to find people. Following the old man's directions, the young man soon spotted a cluster of trees in the distance. Expressing his gratitude, he set off on the path indicated. Glancing back a few steps later, he found that the old man had vanished. Puzzled yet determined, he continued towards the grove of towering pines and abundant bamboo beside a wide flowing stream. Beneath its clear waters, he glimpsed a marble floor resembling a vast, flawless pavement. The water was uniformly shallow, easy to cross, leading him further until he came upon a splendidly adorned house with flawless pillars and entrances. Despite his drenched state, clutching his thorn staff, he entered through the gate and took a seat to rest. The courtyard, paved in seamless marble like polished glass, held only a marble table with the Book of Changes and a jade brazier emitting fragrant incense. Amidst the tranquil scene, undisturbed by wind or commotion, the young man felt the chaos of the world recede from him. As he sat in astonishment, he heard footsteps behind the building. Startled, he turned to see an elderly man of venerable appearance, dressed in green and carrying a 9-section jade staff. His presence was dignified and ageless, resembling that of a sage or immortal. Recognizing him as the master of the house, the young man approached and bowed deeply. The old man greeted him warmly and declared, "I am the master, and I have awaited your arrival for a long time." Taking him by the hand, he led him onward. As they journeyed, the hills grew increasingly enchanting, and gentle breezes and light bestowed upon him a mysterious favor. Suddenly, when he looked again, the man had vanished. Thus he continued alone until he soon arrived at another palace, also constructed of precious stones. It stretched out magnificently before him, its grandeur surpassing even the royal palace in Seoul where he had attended examinations. Approaching the gate, he was received by a figure clad in ceremonial robes who ushered him inside. Passing several pavilions, he finally reached a special one and ascended to the upper floor. There, reclining at a table, sat the ancient sage whom he had encountered previously. Once more he bowed respectfully. This young man, raised humbly in the countryside, was unaccustomed to the company of nobility. Overwhelmed with awe, he dared not raise his eyes. Nevertheless, the elderly master welcomed him again and invited him to sit, remarking, "This is not the dusty world you are accustomed to, but the abode of genies. I knew you would come, so I awaited your arrival." Turning to summon someone, he said, "Bring food for our guest." Shortly after, a servant brought a table laden with sumptuous dishes. The fare was unlike anything seen on earth, plentiful and exotic. The young man, despite his hunger, ate heartily of these strange delicacies. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared away, the old man spoke again. "I have a daughter of marriageable age, and I have been seeking a son-in-law without success. Your arrival aligns with this need. Stay here and become my son-in-law." Bewildered, the young man bowed silently. The host then instructed, "Summon the children." 2 boys around 12 or 13 years old hurried in and seated themselves beside him. Their faces gleamed with a radiance akin to jewels. The master gestured towards them and announced to the guest, "These are my sons." Turning to the boys, he declared, "This young man is the one I have chosen as my son-in-law. Choose an auspicious day for the wedding and inform me." The 2 boys counted the days on their fingers and simultaneously declared, "The day after tomorrow is an auspicious day." The old man turned to the stranger and proclaimed, The wedding day is set. You must now wait in the guest chamber until the appointed time." Then he instructed someone to summon a particular individual. Shortly thereafter, an official of the genies appeared, dressed in ethereal attire. His countenance was radiant and joyful, embodying a spirit of happiness and contentment. The master instructed, "Guide this young man to his quarters and treat him with respect until the wedding day." The official let him out, and as he passed through the gate, a red sedan chair awaited him. Upon mounting it, 8 bearers carried him smoothly away. After a mile or so, they arrived at another splendid palace, flawless in its beauty. Amid elegant gardens of flowers and trees, he descended to enter his pavilion. From jeweled boxes, beautiful garments were brought forth, and he was treated to a perfumed bath and a change of attire. Thus, he exchanged his worn-out clothes for the garments of the celestial beings. The official remained his companion until the appointed time. On the wedding day, more exquisite robes were presented, and he bathed and changed again. Once dressed, he rode in the palanquin to the master's palace, accompanied by 20 or more officials. Upon arrival, a guide directed them to the palace Beautiful, where preparations for the wedding were underway. He paid his respects and then proceeded further inside. The air was filled with the tinkling of jade bells and the fragrance of sweet perfumes as he entered the inner quarters. Many beautiful women awaited him, adorned in splendid attire like heavenly goddesses. Among them he anticipated meeting the master's daughter. Soon, accompanied by a retinue, she appeared, radiant in jewels and exquisite clothing that illuminated the palace. He stood before her, though her face was veiled by a pearl fan. When he finally beheld her, her beauty dazzled him. Compared to her, the other women seemed ordinary, like magpies to a phoenix. Overwhelmed, he dared not raise his eyes. His companion guided him through the necessary rituals and bows, similar to those among men. After the ceremony, he returned to his bridal chamber. The next day, his mother-in-law summoned him. She appeared about 30 years old, her face as fresh as a newly bloomed lotus flower. A grand feast followed, with many guests and music sweeter than mortal ears had ever heard. After dining well, the women lifted their skirts and sleeves, dancing and singing in perfect harmony. Their voices were so enchanting that even the clouds seemed to pause and listen. As the day concluded and the feast ended, everyone departed contentedly. A young man, raised in a country hut, suddenly encountered the chief of the genies and became a participant in his glory and his way of life. His mind was overwhelmed and his thoughts were in turmoil. Doubts mingled with fears. He did not know what to do. He had indeed become a sharer in the joys of the fairies, and a year or so passed in such delight that no words can adequately describe it. One day, his wife asked him, "Would you like to enter the inner sanctuary and see as the fairies do?" He eagerly replied, "I would gladly." She then led him to a special park with beautiful paths surrounded by green hills. As they walked, they encountered delightful scenes: springs of water, sparkling waterfalls, jeweled flowers, and shimmering spray. The scenery became increasingly enchanting, with lovely birds and animals playing about. Once someone entered here, they would never think of returning to Earth. After this, they ascended the tallest peak, resembling a tower with many levels. Before him stretched a vast sea dotted with blessed islands and expansive lands. His wife pointed out each one to him, filled with golden palaces and bathed in a halo of light. They were inhabited by joyful souls, some riding cranes, phoenixes, or unicorns, some sitting on clouds, sailing on the wind, walking on air, or gently gliding up streams, others descending from above or moving west and north in groups. Sweet strains of flutes and harps filled the air. The sights were so numerous and astonishing that he could never recount them all. After the day passed, they returned. Their joy remained unbroken, and 2 years later she bore him 2 sons. Time passed until one day, unexpectedly, as he sat with his wife, tears began to flow down his face. Astonished, she asked the reason for his tears. "I was thinking," he said, "about how a simple countryman living in poverty became the son-in-law of the king of the genies. But in my homeland is my poor old mother, whom I haven't seen all these years. I long to see her, and that's why tears come." His wife chuckled and said, "Do you truly wish to see her? Then go, but don't weep." She informed her father that her husband wished to visit his mother. The chief summoned him and granted permission. The son assumed many servants would accompany him in grandeur, but that was not the case. His wife handed him a small bundle, and that was all. He bid farewell to his father-in-law, who said, "Go now, see your mother, and soon I'll call for you." Accompanied by just one servant, he departed through the main gate. There he saw a thin, poor horse with a ragged saddle. He looked closely and realized it was his deceased horse and servant, both restored to life. Startled, he asked, "How did you come here?" The servant replied, "I was traveling with you on the road when someone abducted me and brought me here. I didn't know why, but I've been here for a long time." Filled with fear, the man quickly packed his belongings and resumed his journey. The genie servant followed behind, but after a short distance, the magical world transformed back into the familiar world of hardships, with its fogs, thorns, and cliffs. He glanced towards the genie realm, now seeming like a dream. Overwhelmed with emotion, he broke down in tears. Seeing him weep, the genie servant said, "You've spent years in the realm of immortals, yet haven't truly transcended, as you still cling to the 7 earthly things: anger, sorrow, fear, ambition, hate, and selfishness. Once you let go of these, there will be no more tears for you." Hearing this, he stopped crying, wiped his cheeks, and apologized. Continuing for another mile, he found himself on the main road. The servant told him, "You know the way from here, so I'll return." And so the young man finally reached home. At home, they were conducting an exorcism. Witches and spirit worshippers were praying. Seeing the young man return, the family was shocked. "It's his ghost," they murmured, until they realized it was truly him. The mother demanded why he hadn't returned sooner. Knowing her volatile nature, he dared not tell her the truth and fabricated a story. It happened to be the anniversary of his supposed death, hence the prayer ceremony. He opened the bundle his wife had given him and found 4 sets of clothes, one for each season. A year later, his mother arranged a marriage with the daughter of a village scholar. Timid and fearing his mother's wrath, he acquiesced, but the marriage lacked happiness, and they barely looked at each other. He confided in his childhood friend about his absence and marriage in the genie realm. The friend was astounded, especially by the strange, durable clothes that never dirtied or wore out, adapting perfectly to each season. 3 years later, a servant arrived with 2 sons from the genie master, along with a message. "Next year, your village will be destroyed, and its people will perish. Follow this messenger, and come with all of you." He shared this with his friend, showing him the sons who resembled silk and jade. The friend informed the mother, who agreed eagerly. They sold their possessions, hosted a grand feast for the town, then bid farewell. This was in 1635. They departed and were never seen again. The following year, the Manchu invasion ravaged the young man's village. Even today, in Kapyong, young and old recount this tale. The Honest Witch. Song Sang-in enrolled in 1601. He was known for his fairness and was feared by corrupt elements in the court. He graduated in 1605 and became a provincial governor. During the turbulent reign of King Kwang Hai, he faced near-death experiences and was exiled to Quelpart for 10 years. But in the spring of 1623, he was recalled. The story. There once lived a Korean named Song Sang-in, whose mind was principled and his spirit unwavering. He held a deep disdain for witches, viewing them as swindlers who exploited the people. Through their alleged prayers, he declared, they plunder the people's possessions. Their folly and extravagance know no bounds. Their beliefs are pure nonsense. If only I could eradicate them from this earth and obliterate their names forever. Sometime later, Song was appointed magistrate of Namwon County in Chula Province. Upon his arrival, he issued a stern decree. Any witch found in this county shall be beaten to death. The area was rigorously monitored, causing all witches to flee to neighboring prefectures. Satisfied, the magistrate thought, now we are free of them. This county, at least, is cleansed. One day, while taking a stroll and resting at Kwanghan Pavilion, Song observed a woman approaching on horseback with a mudang's drum atop her head. Peering closely, he was astounded to recognize her as a mudang witch. He promptly dispatched a yamen runner to arrest her, and upon her arrival, he asked sternly, "Are you a mudang?" She calmly replied, "Yes, I am." "And did you not hear about the official decree?" he inquired. "Yes, I heard," she confirmed. Song pressed further, "Are you not afraid of death lingering in this county?" The Mudang bowed respectfully and responded, "Your Excellency, I have a grievance to present for your consideration. Please hear me out. There are genuine Mudangs and false ones. False Mudangs deserve death, but surely you would not kill an honest Mudang, would you? Your orders target the false Mudangs. I do not believe they apply to those of us who are honest. I am an honest Mudang. I trusted you would spare me, so I chose to stay in peace." Intrigued, the magistrate queried, "How do you discern between honest and false Mudangs?" The woman replied, "Let's put the matter to the test and see. If I am not proven honest, let me die." "Very well," said the magistrate, "but can you really make good, and do you truly know how to call back departed spirits?" The Mudang answered, "I can." The magistrate suddenly thought of an intimate friend who had been dead for some time, and he said to her, "I had a friend of such and such rank in soul. Can you call his spirit back to me?" The Mudang replied, "Let me do so, but first you must prepare food with wine and serve it properly." The magistrate thought for a moment and then said to himself, "It is a serious matter to take a person's life. Let me find out first if she is true or not, and then decide." So he had the food brought. The Mudang said also, "I want a suit of your clothes too, please." This was brought, and she spread her mat in the courtyard, placed the food in order, donned the dress, and so made all preliminary arrangements. She then lifted her eyes toward heaven and uttered the strange magic sounds by which spirits are called, meanwhile shaking a tinkling bell. In a little she turned and said, "I've come." Then she began telling the sad story of his sickness and death and their separation. She reminded the magistrate of how they had played together and of things that had happened when they were at school and in their lessons, of the difficulties they had met in the examinations, of experiences that had come to them during their terms of office. She told secrets that they had confided to each other as intimate friends, and many matters most definitely that only they two knew. Not a single mistake did she make, but told the truth in every detail. The magistrate, when he heard these things, began to cry, saying, "The soul of my friend is really present. I can no longer doubt or deny it." Then he ordered the choicest fare possible to be prepared as a sacrifice to his friend. In a little the friend bade him farewell and took his departure. The magistrate said, "Alas, I thought Mudangs were a brood of liars, but now I know that there are true Mudangs as well as false." He gave her rich rewards, sent her away in safety, recalled his order against witches, and refrained from any matters pertaining to them forever after. Imbang. In the days of King Sejong, students from the Confucian College gathered for a spring festival picnic in a wood near a beautiful spring. They indulged in drinking and feasting throughout the night, leaving the college rooms deserted. However, one student from the countryside, considered insignificant by others, felt it was his duty to remain behind and guard the sacred precincts of the temple while the others enjoyed themselves. Meanwhile, the king sent a eunuch to check how many students had stayed behind. The eunuch reported that all had left except for one countryman, who was vigilantly standing guard alone. Impressed by this, the king summoned the student to his presence, dressed in his ordinary clothes. Upon meeting him, the king asked, "Why did you choose to stay alone while everyone else went off to enjoy themselves?" The student replied, "I also wished to join the festivities, but leaving the sacred temple completely unguarded did not seem right to me, so I remained." The king was pleased with his answer and inquired further, "Do you know how to write poetry?" The student modestly replied, "I know only a little about it." The king then presented him with the first half of a verse. "After the rains, the mountains weep." He challenged the student to complete the verse. Without hesitation, the student responded, "Before the wind, the grass is tipsy." Impressed by his wisdom and poetic skill, the king honored the student, recognizing his sense of duty and his talent. The king, overjoyed, commended his talent and immediately conferred upon him a special graduation, presenting him with a diploma, adorning his hat with flowers, and declaring through a proclamation that he had successfully passed the Al-Song examination. Without delay, the king arranged for him to receive ceremonial headgear, a red coat, a horse for riding, 2 boys as attendants, flute players, and harpers, instructing him, "Now, proceed to the gathering and display yourself." As the picnickers enjoyed their festivities, they suddenly heard the melodies of flutes and harps and wondered at the source. It was not customary for new graduates to appear at such events. Upon looking closer, they beheld a triumphant candidate, attired in ceremonial garments, escorted by boys, and riding the king's steed to greet them. Upon inquiry, they discovered with astonishment that he was the rustic countryman they had left behind at the temple. Confounded by this revelation of royal favor, the assembly dispersed in confusion and returned home immediately. This distinguished graduate later became a great and renowned figure, thanks to the king's benevolence. Yimbang. The Fortunes of Yu. There once lived a man named Yu in Yeongnam during the reign of King Ushage. He was well educated in the classics, had passed his examinations, and held a minor position at the Confucian College. Despite his qualifications, he was of low rank, which meant advancement was nearly impossible. Being from the countryside, he lacked connections and influence in Seoul where he lived. Disheartened and lonely, Yu decided to return to his rural home. Before leaving, a palace secretary who knew Yu came to bid him farewell. Seizing the opportunity, Yu expressed his desire to see the royal office of the secretaries, a place he had never visited despite his time in Seoul. The secretary explained the difficulties of gaining access during the day due to the crowds and strict regulations, but revealed his plan to spend the night there, allowing them a chance to explore in the evening. Although unusual, the secretary arranged for Yu to be escorted into the palace the next day. As planned, Yu entered the palace grounds that evening, only to find himself alone as the secretary had not arrived. The gates closed behind him, trapping him inside. Fortunately, a servant of the secretary took pity on Yu and provided him a hidden corner to spend the night safely, promising to help him leave discreetly in the morning. Unable to sleep, Yu decided to explore quietly. During the rainy season, part of the palace wall had collapsed, providing Yu an unintended entry into the royal quarters. He found himself in a magnificent garden adorned with trees, lakes, and pathways. Lost in admiration, he wondered whose residence this could be. Suddenly, a man approached. He wore a new cap and carried a staff, accompanied by a servant. It was none other than King Sejong himself, taking a leisurely stroll under the moonlight with one of his eunuchs. When Yu encountered the king, he had no inkling of his majesty's identity. The king inquired sharply, "Who are you? And how did you enter here?" Yu explained his predicament, recounting how he had entered with the secretary who had failed him, leading to the gates being closed and him being confined for the night. Spying the moonlight and discovering a breached wall, he seized the opportunity to climb over. Curiously, he asked, "Whose residence is this?" The king revealed, "I am the owner of this house." He then invited Yu inside, seating him on a mat beside him, and they engaged in conversation. Learning that Yu had excelled in the classics, but struggled to secure a significant position due to his humble origins and lack of influential connections, the king sympathized. Yu expressed his disillusionment, contemplating a return to his hometown to live out his days. Inquiring further, the king asked, "You are knowledgeable in the classics. Do you also understand the Book of Changes?" Yu admitted, "I am familiar with the basics, but not the deeper intricacies." Intrigued, the king ordered a eunuch to fetch the Book of Changes, which he was studying at the time. Illuminated by the moonlight, they examined a passage that had perplexed the king, and Yu elucidated it, explaining each character with clarity and conviction. Impressed, the king and Yu spent the entire night studying together. As they parted ways at dawn, the king lamented, "With all your knowledge, you have never been utilized. Alas, for my kingdom." Yu expressed a desire to depart immediately, but the king cautioned him against leaving too early to avoid the scrutiny of the guards. He instructed Yu to return to his previous location and wait until daylight before leaving through the open gate. Upon returning home the next morning, Yu received a surprise visit from a royal secretary who appointed him as the overseer of literature. This announcement stirred controversy among the officials, who gathered in protest at the palace courtyard, questioning the appointment of an unknown figure to such a prestigious position. The king responded to their objections, saying, "If you are so opposed, I will reconsider." However, the very next day, he elevated Yu to an even higher office. Once again, the officials voiced their discontent, prompting the king to retort, "Truly, if you object so strongly, I will abandon the matter altogether." The day after, he appointed him to an even higher office. Once again, there was protest from all, and he seemed to yield to them. However, the following day, he promoted him even higher, and again the protests poured in, so much so that the king appeared to acquiesce. On the subsequent day, His Majesty personally penned an appointment for him as vice president of all the literati. The senior officials gathered once more, deliberating on what the king intended and how best to respond. If we don't intervene somehow, he'll appoint him as president of the literati, they concluded. They decided to temporarily set the issue aside and reconsider their options later. A royal banquet was announced, gathering all the officials. During this event, the high ministers of state quietly approached the king, expressing, "It is not suitable for someone so obscure to hold such a crucial position. Your Majesty's rapid promotions have greatly unsettled the entire official body. Despite our objections, you continue to elevate him. Could your Majesty please explain the reason for this?" The king remained silent, but directed a eunuch to bring the Book of Changes. Opening it to a particularly challenging section, he sought its interpretation. Not even the highest ministers could provide an answer. He queried each by name, yet all remained silent. Finally, the king remarked, "I have a profound interest in the Book of Changes. It is the esteemed scripture of the sages. Anyone who comprehends it surely deserves promotion. Yet, none of you grasp its essence, whereas you, whom you oppose, has elucidated it for me completely. Now, what do you have to say? Yu's promotion is entirely justified. Why do you persist in objection? I will continue to elevate him further and further, so cease all opposition." Fearing embarrassment, they dared not raise the issue again and fell silent. Yu, from that moment onward, became the royal teacher of the Chuyuk, Book of Changes, steadily advancing in rank until he eventually became head of the Confucian College, wielding unparalleled influence. Note, many talented individuals often lack opportunities for advancement. It is challenging for one's abilities to be recognized in high places, even more so in the presence of a king. The good fortune that befell the first scholar was divinely ordained. Through his diligent care of an empty house, honor came to him, leading to his promotion. The other's unauthorized entry into the palace was a significant transgression, yet he was pardoned, received, and honored by royal favor. Through a single line of poetry, a man's talents were revealed, and through an explanation of the Chuyuk, another's path to high office was opened. If Sejong had not been a wise and enlightened king, such events would not have occurred. Such occurrences are exceedingly rare, leaving all to marvel at what transpired with these two individuals. However, I am more astonished by the king's discernment in discovering them. His virtue and achievements are renowned to this day, earning him the title of Korea's King of the Golden Age.